There's a 17th century phrase that says, adversity makes for strange bedfellows. And I think what happens when you are in the middle of enormous adversity, you need to do whatever it takes to win, right? That's, I think, why Zelensky is so patriotic and viewed so heroically around the world now. He's trying to defend his country and his people. I want to take the counter of, David, what you said. I actually think we are at war, but it's the most positive form of it in the sense that we are learning a different kind of warfare. Now, if you think about how we used to fight up until basically the Persian Gulf War, it was armaments and tanks. And then that evolved in the Middle East because we had to fight insurgents and, urban terrorism in many ways, right? I think this is a way in which we are learning that there's a different kind of warfare as well, which is fundamentally economic. And so, it may not take the same shape as drones and missiles and fire and guns and bullets, but I think you would be foolish to make the mistake that we are now not at economic war with Russia. And at the end of the day, the outcome is the same, which is either they survive or they don't survive. And everything we've done points to that we are willing to fight, and we are willing to put a lot of economic collateral and chips on the field in order to win this battle. So I think in that respect, we are kind of at a war.
Is this a nuclear level economic decoupling?
This is my point, is like everybody has a historical framework where they want to go back to how the natural path of escalation works. And I think this is a very different form of escalation that we need to consider. And I think that this is the kind of warfare that may actually, be the way in which wars are fought in the future. You seize assets, you shut off access to supply routes, you make it impossible for anything to work. So, I'll give you a simple example. A form of warfare is what's happening right now in the sense that, for example, the Russian skies are completely clear. Not just because that, no external airlines will necessarily fly there, but because Boeing and Rolls-Royce and GE and Airbus basically pulled all of their support, all of their parts, right? We've gone to war with respect to their petroleum and LNG supplies. How? Not necessarily because we won't still stop payments, which we are still enabling, but because the actual refiners won't take the oil and the LNG, because they then would be subject to sanctions. The people who would ship that are no longer taking those payments or those barrels of oil into the marketplace because they can't get insured by international banks. So in all of these various ways, we are actually at war. And I think, maybe this is the way war should be fought in the future because it'll save thousands of lives in the more classic way of describing how lives are sacrificed for war. In times of uncertainty, you actually want to be deploying. So, I announced, what was it, last week, I think it was?
The solar deal?
The solar deal, I put $228 million into this thing. And then I did another deal. I put $45 million into this thing you guys know about, which we haven't announced yet.
Yep.
So, but other than that, I've been literally white-knuckled. I don't like to open the stock app. There's no point.
Take some Dramamine before you open your Morgan Stanley account.
The stock app. And what's so funny is like my Bloomberg terminal, which is right beside me here at my desk, I have not logged into it.
Oh, God. Put it in a drawer. Unplug it.
Yeah. There's just no point. At the end of every week, I get a report, right? Kind of like our P&L. And I just look at the top line. Like Connor always sends me the top line is like, and the last 8 weeks in a row, we've lost 1%, we've lost 2%, we've lost 3%. The time that it
Sachs
was
wishes he lost 1%.
I celebrated. I got so drunk that night. I was like, finally. I sent you guys this tweet from Morgan Housel, who is a great guy. And he has this fabulous tweet. He says, it says the shock cycle. And it's this beautiful cycle. Assume good news is permanent, oblivious to bad news. Then you ignore the bad news. Then you deny the bad news. Then you panic at the bad news. But then you accept the bad news. And then you ignore the good news. You deny the good news. You accept the good news. And then you assume the good news is permanent. That starts the cycle. if I could just put it out there, I don't know today if you guys saw non-farm payrolls, but we had a huge print in unemployment, like really great print, meaning like a lot of employers were able to find people to take jobs. It was a big number.
So we've already made the assumption that the valuations are going to come down. We believe what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine right now is turbocharging the shock to high valuation stocks that began last February when we were all getting vaccinated, and hopes were that the economy would continue to gain momentum. And so we now believe that Russia and Ukraine have turbocharged that shock. Commodities, they're on fire. We believe this is a supply problem, much more than a demand problem. I'm sure there's a scramble to build inventories of anything now, anything in the energy complex, any of the metals that come out of Russia, food out of the breadbasket of the Ukraine. Interestingly, the commodity price increases are in the face of the dollar increasing. The dollar increasing tends to put pressure on prices, but this supply problem and maybe inventory hoarding is overcoming that. The dollar is going up because it's a flight to safety currency. And we're also seeing other flights to safety. So the dollar's up about 2.5% since the end of January, when the Russia-Ukraine issues were becoming more obvious. And then the other two flights to safety we've seen, Bitcoin 6.1% and gold 8.3%. So the crypto networks are proving their worth as a neutral technology platform. We're seeing donations of both Bitcoin and Ether to the Ukraine. I think it's 50 million, if I'm not mistaken, in the last week. And we're also seeing Bitcoin as a currency hedge for Russian citizens who are watching the ruble get hammered here. And, you know, these are not the oligarchs. In fact, there's not enough Bitcoin out there for the oligarchs to hedge, and they have been hedging for years anyway. This is for the average Russian citizen who actually is aghast, many of them, as we hear it, aghast at what's going on in Russia.
And I think that we have proven a willingness to print capital and money. And so if you put those two things together, I think there could be a real possibility that Powell becomes very accommodative. And, you know, he and Biden and the entire administration come together with Europe and everybody else and say, get the money printer back going, because we're going to stand the line on these economic sanctions.